Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this episode of the Niche Cast. We are from the Niche Cache, or the Nishi Cache, or however the fuck you want to say it, because who gives a poo? We are here to chat our way through some Aotearoa sporting matters. On the radar today, we have a Blackcaps squad. Pretty interesting wildcard. I'm excited to talk about that, and we'll get onto that in a fleshy discussion later in the podcast. We'll also touch on the all-white squad, which is also really exciting, as well as some Wellington Phoenix updates. New Zealand Aotearoa Warriors face the Gold Coast Titans, so we're going to preview that game. And we, just because we could probably yarn through Kiwi-NRL mahi for a good whole podcast. I'd say I could do 2 hours on Kiwi-NRL. So we'll keep a lid on the Kiwi-NRL discussion in this podcast and these Thursday niche casts by going deeper into the Warriors' opponent, because it is a game that a lot more Kiwi fans are going to watch. And it's also a good way just to track the Kiwi-NRL progress while touching on the Warriors and getting like a new cast of Kiwi-NRL folk to dive into each week as well. And right at the top of the show, the start of the podcast, probably get into some Dan Hooker versus Arnold Allen UFC stuff as well, because that matchup, I think it's scheduled for a comfy Sunday morning. Don't mind it. It's like those Joseph Parker fights in the UK wildcard. They come on breakfast time, or if you're intermittent fasting, time for a little bit of a coffee, whatever you're into. Or if you're Tom Brady, just smash out an avocado. Or you're just hungover and you can't be fucked doing anything. So who gives a shit? Shout out to the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/our niche cache. Best way to support the niche cache and all our sports content. Always writing about Aotearoa sport. Always providing the contents, 2 podcasts a week. And there's also a Patreon podcast. We try to do those on Monday mornings as well. Touch on the relevant topics from the weekend. And we'll chuck a couple of clips from that Patreon podcast up on our YouTube feed as well. So if you do appreciate any position of the niche cache, whether it's the central midfielder role, whether it's Libby Kakache on the left back, whether it's fucking James Fisher-Harris steaming up the guts, whatever position, whatever pocket of the niche cache you're interested in, the best way to support the content is via Patreon, patreon.com/our niche cache. And shout out to our email banger via Substack, thenichecache.substack.com. That goes live every Monday and Friday afternoon /evening. And that is where you find all the niche cache content together. So the podcast, the links to the bigger yarns, as well as bits of information about Aotearoa sport that only feature in those emails. So sign up to that, thenichecache.substack.com. And of course, we're always writing about Aotearoa sport on the website, www.theniche-cache.com. The wildcard is written about Alex Rufer's injury for the Wellington Phoenix, so you can check that out if you're interested in the Wellington Phoenix. You can also check out the Warriors preview versus the Titans. You can also check out, probably the most important one for me, is the latest Plunkett Shield yarn. Won't talk too much about the Plunkett Shield stuff in this episode of the Niche Cast, but you can check out information about Auckland and Northern, who won their games against Otago and Wellington, respectively, after both winning games in the previous round. So if you do love Plunkett Shield cricket, make sure you check that out as well. Just type of stuff we deliver. Always fresh yarns. Every day, hopefully, there is something fresh to read on the website, theniche-cache.com. Wobbly Wildcard. Kick us off with a dose of mindfulness.
Yeah, I've been dipping into the poets more recently, and I've got another one here from Raina Maria Rilke, who said, "The purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things."
You've been getting into the poetry. I've been getting into like how sports teams and everyone, they're just like automatically mindful. I think I've said that before, because you hear a lot about like just control what you can control. And that is just pure mindfulness. Like if everyone operated with that in mind in their everyday life, fuck, we're cruising, we're surfing. The other one is learning from your losses. It's really hard to learn from victories. And it takes like supreme self-awareness and just understanding to really like, yeah, we win, but there's this, this, and this also to do. When you lose, all that shit is just thrown in your face. And that is what you're referring to right there. You got to be defeated by life frequently to actually learn and grow. In the same way that a sports team, to really progress themselves, every so often, they might need a loss to assess some things.
Yeah, and the more you grow with those defeats, the sort of more well, it's to use his well, it's not his words, they're translated, he's just German, but the more you learn from them, the greater and greater the defeats become in a good way. Like but not always in a good way, because sometimes like the closer you get to it, because this is kind of what made this quote stand out for me, was watching Manchester United get knocked out of the Champions League yesterday, and I had a thought that I've had many times, generally whenever like a trophy gets away from a team I support, which is, first of all, like, why can't my teams just win stuff? Like, why can't they win stuff? I want to like celebrate something like that. It'd be fun. And then I thought, well, I mean, I did get one. Like the Blackcaps winning the Test Championship was up there. Not a whole lot out. Can you think, like, is that something that vibes with you as well as a sports fan? Like, do you just find you lose 99% of the time out of, like, even when you win, ultimately the season ends in like a playoff defeat, and the better you, like, the further you go, the more it hurts, but also that also plays into that, like, the greater the defeat, like the better you are, the greater the defeat. You lost in the grand final this time, or you lost on a countback in the super over or whatever, you know?
Yes. And then the next step is like, because like Kiwi-NRL, there's no winners or losers. So I can just follow Kiwi-NRL and I'm just like cruising. Like, that's why I kind of detach from the Warriors, because obviously the Warriors lose a lot. Kiwi-NRL, there's no losers. It's just you're following what's happening. Even like the White Ferns in this World Cup, White Ferns are playing Thursday afternoon, kind of a must-win game against South Africa, so shout out to them. But we won't talk about them too much in the podcast just because of the scheduling timing there. But like, for me, that's more like, obviously I want the Kiwi teams to win, but to your point, a lot of Kiwi teams lose all the time. So that is like Aotearoa Kiwis always losing. Kiwi Ferns don't really beat Australia. Like a lot of these New Zealand teams, like anytime the Blackcaps go to Australia, they're fucked. And it's just like, oh, the White Ferns, of course they lose to Australia. Like, it just happens. And that's what you're talking to. But for my sanity, I then try to detach from it and just like learn from it. So I'm getting that learning thing without the results having to get in, because I'm learning about the White Ferns and women's cricket, and instead of going through the emotional journey of their World Cup campaign, which a lot of it stems from rugby league, whether it's the Warriors, whether it's the Aotearoa Kiwis, like at some point for your own health, you need to detach from that insanity. And that's why we have the curse. That's why we have Kiwi-NRL. Like, at some point, you can't just put yourself through that emotional turmoil, which I think a lot of people seem to enjoy.
Yes. I mean, I enjoy it to some extent, because I find a lot of the same things as what you're just saying there. When you write about sports, you have to have a level of detachment. Like, when you make it like a job to do that, otherwise you're just going to be like writing nonsense, right? You have to have a distance between you and the thing, which means you can't really like experience it as just a like pure uncut fan. Which is why I try to keep a few things that I don't write about where I can just have that level of engagement where it's like there's nothing more to it other than me being completely invested in the outcome of this thing. And I like having a few of those to like keep that torch burning, you know, to experience it in the way that probably a lot of people who would then be, because when you're reading about it, it's completely different. You're reading about it, you can read it from that full emotional investment state. You just can't really write from that position. So to keep that like I don't know, relatability myself. Obviously want to have some of that, but also I think getting back to the Rilke quote about the purpose of life being defeated by greater and greater things. I think it's it's a better way to engage with life is to feel all of the extremes and not just like sit in the middle. So I want to have some ones where I like put something at stake, like where it could be like ultimate glory or just terrible defeat. And I think I must be a universal thing at this point, because it's not just the Kiwi teams that I support. Like the Dallas Cowboys always find a way to end terribly every season. I had a lovely run for a while there where I think the Dallas Mavericks and the St. George Dragons both won titles within like a year of each other. Pretty average for both of them since, and like a decade since. Pretty dull times that have followed that. Maybe that's penance, I don't know. But like I think it is a universal thing, because ultimately if you have like a 16-team NRL, one team wins the championship. You have a 30-team NBA, I think. One team wins a championship. Everyone has different ambitions. Not every team's going and expecting to win a championship, but every team that wins the playoff is at least, every team that makes the playoffs is at least hoping to, go far. And ultimately your season ends on a loss, either the loss by missing those playoffs entirely or losing the last game of your playoff series to be eliminated. Like every season basically ends on a sad note. And one team gets to have like the ultimate glory, and it doesn't get shared around evenly either. It's not like everyone gets to take a turn. It's often the same teams that win over and over, and then the fans there will lose that engagement a little bit because they're too used to it or complacent or whatever. But I think that is a universal aspect of it, and I think that plays in quite nicely to that quote of just like just copping those L's, and but finding like a nobility and a pride in copping those L's, because that's like you've risked something, and if you've risked something, it's sudden, like it's more worth it. So something like that. Because I got Stephen Adams over my shoulder on the thing. There's a Rick and Morty quote that he uses in his Twitter thing, which comes up every time I Twitter search Stephen Adams, even though he never uses his Twitter account. Rick and Morty quote that says like, to live is to risk it all, or something along those lines. Just randomly, that seems to fit quite nicely with what I was just saying there as well.
You're trying to draw the link between sports and your quote. I'm thinking more of there's a clear differentiation, because if you're doing the pursuits, if you're chasing the L's in life from which you can learn and grow, it puts into perspective the sporting L's, and then like, what are you gaining? Like, yeah, you're risking your sanity, but you're not learning anything unless you're really embarking on the spiritual journey of supporting the Warriors. You're not gaining anything by like, I'm the fucking man. I stick by the Warriors. I'm the man, and I risk it all. Well, you're probably doing that because you're not doing that in your life. So you feel that void needs to be filled, and that's where you dive into the sports. Whereas if you just applied that to your life and you're like, I'm going to go out and try this and try that, and I'll probably cop it out. I'll lose, I'll learn and grow. Well, then just becoming a better person, which I don't really find is the end spot in supporting a sports team. Doesn't see it. That's not the Shangri-La that you're chasing.
Like you say, if you apply those lessons, then it can be. And it can be both things, where you can be fully invested in this and it's not like a compensatory thing. But yeah, I think you need to be able to apply that to all areas. And I think a more well-rounded person experiences like, or doesn't shy away from things like, grief and suffering and sadness and things like that as well. Like you got to feel the full range of emotions. So sports teach us that, but yeah, probably best not to keep it in sports.
You did mention Stephen Adams behind you, just dripped out, swagged out. Aotearoa just fashion on full display. And can you do a quick bit about Stephen Adams and the Memphis Grizzlies through the lens of what happens if they have a playoff matchup against the Dallas Mavericks? How are you feeling about that?
Well, it shouldn't happen in the first round, because I think the seedings aren't going to match, but it could happen in the second round. I mean, I'd just like, it's happened before, because the Mavericks have played the Thunder in the playoffs before. And I think the Thunder whooped them, come to think of it. The the Mavs did beat the Thunder on the way to the championship, but that was before Steven Adams got drafted. I don't know. I think I'd just sort of sit back and try not to have expectations, rather just be like, let's see. I mean, the ideal would be that, I don't know. I was gonna say the ideal would be that the team I support wins, but Steven Adams has a great series. But then also that wouldn't be the ideal because Steven Adams would be eliminated. So I guess it's kind of a glass half full or glass half empty. I'll choose the idea of like, well, one of them is going to make the next round if that's the case, in which case just enjoy what's going on here and then support whoever advances the rest of the way.
So for me, NBA basketball is that kind of little pocket of fandom which I don't cover. So I can then invest in it emotionally. So for me, it's just Steven Adams and fuck anyone else. Like, if regardless of who it is, I want to see like just everyone destroyed at the hands of Steven Adams and the Memphis Grizzlies. And if it's the Dallas Mavericks, it's the Dallas Mavericks. Even if it's Giannis, like, I love Giannis, but like, fuck him if he's facing Steven Adams. You know, like, that's the attitude, and that's the fandom, and that's the connection to Steven Adams. Let's keep things moving, keep it rolling, rocking and rolling. Dan Hooker, he is an England wildcard. And I don't expect you to know too much about this fight, but I do think there's an interesting wrinkle here, because England has had a little moment, not in combat sports, not in boxing, not in the UFC, but in terms of Aotearoa combat sports. And we talk a lot about how the England test teams suck. And that has led to like, what's wrong with county cricket? Well, county cricket helps Will Young become a test batsman. Devon Conway scored runs in county cricket and he's chilling. Daryl Mitchell went to county cricket and got better. Matt Henry just stacked up second division wickets like for fun. So county cricket is just helping all these New Zealand cricketers get better. And right now, England is helping our boxers. You got Joseph Parker connected to Fury, bit of Sonny Bill action in there as well. David Naika's there as well. So there's that element. And now Dan Hooker fights in London, and there's a dude from City Kickboxing, one of their training partners is from England. And so his gym in England can just host Dan Hooker. And when I think about with City Kickboxing, since the pandemic started, it's all been about their international relationships, because they've been able to spend time in the USA before and after their fights. Not ideal, not perfect, but as Dan Hooker always says, as City Kickboxing always say, like, you can only control what you can control. Just fucking flush the dunny, move on, keep the hard mahi going. It's not ideal, but they just like, okay, we'll just train with our homies over here, and we'll just, you know, we won't be able to return to New Zealand, but we can still, through our relationships and our connections, still get the best out of ourselves in San Diego. Or thanks to the UFC and, you know, our solid working relationship, you can really benefit from staying in and around Las Vegas. Dan Hooker now goes to England, and there's a connection there, let alone their pretty deep connection in Thailand with Tiger Muay Thai. And then you've got the Volkanovski connection in Australia as well. So there's like I believe that's a low-key factor in how City Kickboxing have been able to juggle the pandemic and the obvious difficulties they've had there, which is also important because Dan Hooker's dropping down a weight division from lightweight to featherweight, I believe it is. But whatever division it is, who gives a shit? He's dropping down a division. And when you factor that in with having to fly to England, fight in England, and all, you know, jet lag and just time adjustment and all that, having some sort of training base in England and connections there is going to be beneficial. And Dan Hooker's, he is able to drop it down a weight division because of all the technology and all the science behind diet, exercise, and just like rest and recovery. That is, I think he's got the fight dietitian in more locally, like New Zealand and Australia. And then he did a lot of testing at the UFC facility in Las Vegas, because he had to show Eugene Behrman and the coaching staff, as well as the UFC, that it was like a seriously viable option. because he was in this weight division to start with in the UFC. He went 3-3. Then he moved up a weight division and had like a 4-fight win streak. I think he won 7 out of 8 fights as a lightweight. So it was like, oh, well, you moved up a weight division, so you didn't have to weight cut. So obviously, this is where you belong. Well, now he's dropping back down. But now he's got all the benefits of the modern technology in 2022. Like, fuck. That space has changed really fast. Like, it's 2022. He probably moved weight divisions around 2015, 2016. And like in that time, leaps and bounds have been made in diet, nutrition, exercise science, rest and recovery. It's actually kind of boggling to think about. Like, that's been a massive leap in sporting technology, because dudes would have been taking the piss back in 2014, and that's only 8 years ago, which is crazy. So all that's happened for Dan Hooker. Now he fights Arnold Allen, who is, I think people are saying he's 7-0 in the UFC, and is a very well-rounded fighter, great striking by the looks of it, really impressive grappling, and it's a really interesting challenge for Dan Hooker, dropping down the weight division against someone who, if he wins, is going to be pushing for a title shot, just as Dan Hooker might be pushing for a title shot if he wins as well. So it's a fascinating matchup. I don't know too much about Arnold Allen, but it's still a fascinating matchup given the drop in weight division, given that Arnold Allen is a well-versed fighter, good striker, good grappling, kind of similar to Dan Hooker in that regard, although he is smaller than Dan Hooker. So that might be crucial. Dan Hooker controlling the distance, controlling the space through his striking. So it's a fascinating matchup, mainly due to everything that Dan Hooker's going through. And what do we know about Dan Hooker? He has had 5 fights since the start of the pandemic. Arnold Allen has had 2 fights since the start of the pandemic. So that puts into context the absolute fucking freak that Dan Hooker is in the UFC. And this is also a week period of City Kickboxing Funk, because next weekend, Kai Kara France has a fight as well.
This is only slightly like on the same topic, but you mentioned him at the start of that thing, because there is this little like boxing scene that's popped up as well with Joseph Parker, basically built around Joseph Parker's friendship with Tyson Fury. And Tyson Fury recommends Amanda Lee as his new trainer, and then they all get involved in the same gym, and David Nika goes over and joins onto the, joins Stefano ahead of the Parker's last fight. Nika on the undercard there. I did write a little bit about this in the email recently, I think 2 emails ago, because Nika's talking about wanting to have, I think he said 2 or 3 fights before the end of the year, and I was spinning off from that because Parker's wondering about what to do next, and he's talking about wanting to getting frisky to get back in the ring, and obviously he's heavily involved right now in Tyson Fury's camp as a former opponent of Dillian White, who Fury's up against. I think Fury's fought him before as well, but Parker's fought him more recently. So he's a big part of his camp, doing some sparring and stuff. And Nick is involved there, and Sonny Bill Williams is involved there. Do you know what Sonny Bill Williams is doing? Like, has he got a boxing fight lined up or whatever? Or because he talked about it when he retired from rugby league, that he wanted to have a couple years of boxing and see what's up, but he hasn't really done anything yet. I know he turned down a chance to fight Gallen because he said he's not ready. Like, he would need a few other fights before that. But do you know what he's up to? Like, has he got something lined up or whatever?
I think he's taking the ginormous leap forward of fighting Barry Hall.
Right.
Like I think Barry Hall is like the AFL equivalent of Paul Gallen. And I don't know when that fight is happening. I don't even know for certain if that fight is happening, but I think I've seen a few things about that. I actually feel a bit weird about Sonny Bill because he's doing. I just wish he actually played for Samoa. That's what I'm saying. He never actually decided to play for Samoa. So, bro, you had ample opportunity to represent Samoa on various things. And I was like, but that's completely different kettle of fish. But I don't think he is actually like. I do think he's in a weird space with the boxing where it's still in this kind of Australian celebrity sportsman type of boxing, and it's not in certified world, international, global universe who's the best boxer right rounds,
Yeah, but that's not really Sonny Bill's thing, is it? Like he's not going to be on the same level as the other guys. He's just out there because he's decent at it. Yeah, but they all talk.
No, but that's the thing. This is the root of the Sonny Bill thing, because when Sonny Bill's talking, he's all about playing for Samoa. But you didn't actually play for Samoa, like you could have. And you fantastic. You might be a serious heavyweight boxer, like fair play to you. That will add to your legend. Will you do it?
Yeah, well, fighting. It says, I looked it up. It says he's fighting Barry Hall on March 23rd, which is like next week. Assuming that's it's crept up, but that's in Sydney, which he's been part of all these training camps up to extremely recently. I assume he's gone back to Aussie now for this, but up to extremely recently, he's been a part of all these camps in England as well, which is where he's done a lot of his boxing prep, I guess, because it's just a better quality to hang out with like a world heavyweight champion and Tyson Fury and use his facilities and whatever. But a little bit, we're like a little bit odd. He's using that and then going back to like the Aussie celebrity boxing type thing. But the Aussie celebrity boxing thing is slightly better than like what the New Zealand version of that used to be a few years ago, which Joseph Parker came up on undercards of, and then leading cards with just a bunch of like, randos fighting each other and his undercards. And then now, Paul Gallen's turned out to be a half decent fighter. He did fight Justice Huni. He's just like a legit prospect. And Junior Farr is trying to get onto that a little bit too, because he was trying to fight Justice Huni for ages, never came around. And now it sounds like he's probably going to fight Lucas Brown, who's, title shot back in the day. Lucas Brown, he's not a mug, 43 years of age. He might be a mug now. He wasn't once upon a time. I don't know, but that's actually not a terrible fight for Junior Farr. But it's interesting for him to see him sort of latching onto the Aussie side of things there, because as good as the City Kickboxing international connections have been for UFC guys, not as much for boxing. Like Hemi Ahio fought last year, had to go over to the UAE and do it. Junior Farr he has not fought since last February when he fought Joseph Parker. He's just not all his fault or organizational fault. Like obviously they had trouble getting something got over the line, which didn't happen with Huni. Then he got COVID and then there was restrictions and like all sorts of stuff. But hopefully he's back on the wagon soon as well, because he deserves to be part of that same crew.
So far, the Sonny Bill progression has been New Zealand footy player, celebrity boxing, and then Australia footy player, celebrity boxing. Yeah. So hopefully there's a level 3 to that where it's like England footy player, celebrity boxing. He might fight James Haskell or something, because James Haskell was an old English player who was trying to fight MMA. I don't know. But yes, Dan Hook does have a fight on Sunday morning, and it should be an interesting one. Like Arnold Allen, I'm just looking here, wildcard, only has wins by decision, really. Last 4 wins are all by decision, submission. So he's got 8 fights in the UFC, 8 wins, 6 by submission, 2 by submission, 6 by decision. As we know, Dan Hooker, he'll fucking knee you in the face. Like, he's coming out guns blazing, and I can't say if you're trying to like go full 3 rounds with Dan Hooker, point him up and really control the fight. Like, I don't know too much about Allen, so I don't know his like ability, if that's going to be unrealistic. But what we do know about Dan Hooker is that he loves those deep waters. He loves really niggly fights. And if you're someone who's got a lot of decision victories and you haven't really shown a record on paper to finish your opponent, I'm curious to see how that matches up against Dan Hooker, based solely on what we know about Dan Hooker. Let's go footy here, wildcard. Aotearoa Warriors face the Gold Coast Titans. And after our discussion about the Warriors halves on the Patreon podcast on Monday, Shaun Johnson was apparently injured. So now we have the Chanel Harris-Tavita Ash Taylor halves combination with Reece Walsh at fullback. And I wrote about this morning. It's just all about depth in the NRL this season. Players are going to be unavailable, whether it's injury, suspension, actually catching the influenza, or I'm fairly certain shit will hit the fan at some stage of the season as far as the Kyrie Irving type of things go. I'm like, at some stage there will be a drama in the NRL in alignment with Kyrie Irving pandemic ideas. So that is to say, you need depth. You need like 5 other forwards outside your current top 17 who can step in and do a job at the NRL level. You need backup halves. You need someone who can do a job at fullback. You can need, like, just with the concussion stuff, you need to have someone in your squad who can play center and do a job there. Because, like, if you lose a winger, then your center has to go to the wing, someone has to step in a center or vice versa. And it's like, right now, more than ever, I feel the depth is the most important thing. And if you can have a completely different halves combination from round 1 to round 2, that seems like good depth. Like, of course, we all want the same halves combination every week to win games and build chemistry, but it's not realistic. And we spoke about the Shaun Johnson falling victim to the Warriors curse wildcard on the Patreon podcast, and then he gets injured. You know, so that's just doubling down. But some of these signings, like Jesse Arthurs was strictly signed as depth, and now he's required. Ash Taylor was signed as a backup half. Now he's required. And those options, I believe, are pretty handy to have in your team. General vibe is, of course, Matt Lodge returns as well. But this game is just like shootout. This is probably going to be 30 points each. Not a whole lot of defense. I think that plays into the Warriors' hands. They only have 43% possession against the Dragons and still put up a competitive performance, which is encouraging. And I don't think the Warriors, despite what the headlines about David Fafita and the headlines about Fasua Mala'awi, the headlines about Jaden Campbell, these are all the attractive players to the Australian media. It's where all the content lies, the headline lies. Same thing with Reece Walsh. Like, the Gold Coast Titans have that air of expectation. They have that air of good on paper and a team that other people are excited about. I don't think they're a whole lot better than the Warriors, though. So I'm curious to see how that plays out as far, like, in the prism of this being a shootout type of matchup where it's like highly unlikely it's a gritty defensive game. Titans win 10-6. You know, it's not going to be like that, I don't think. It's going to be a 25-24 plus point performance. The Titans only had 43% possession last week as well, and they scored 28 points. So they also conceded over 30 points. That's the team they are. Warriors, we know what the Warriors are. So I think it's a fun matchup for a Saturday evening-ish. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I saw scraps of the Titans game against the Eels last week, where I just remember looking and they were up by like a couple of tries, and then they weren't anymore, and then they were again, and then I saw that they'd lost. So it seems like that sounds extremely like shootout areas to me. Not too like fewer points, but not too similar to the flow of that Warriors-Dragons game either, where it was like one team had the ascendancy for a little bit, other team pulls it back, other team pushes back and forward again, and then, you know, goes on and wins it. where a few little momentum tips either way might have changed the outcome. That's always more of the case when you get like a higher scoring thing with like, what was it, 30, 32, 28. Three penalty goals being the difference there. If I'm looking at that, for the Parramatta Eels, they were down by 2, kicked a penalty goal to go ahead, kicked to tie it up, kicked a penalty goal to go ahead, kicked a penalty goal right at the end to ice it. That's one way to do it.
The Eels also scored a try. Mitchell Moses just booted it like 60 meters downfield, hit the goalpost, bounced back to an Eels player. So like, it was just a weird fucking game.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I only saw scraps of it and it looked weird, and then everything else about it seems also weird. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all for the Warriors to come up against a weird team though. Because they're a weird team themselves, and when two weird teams meet, you never know what's going to happen, and you just roll the dice, see how it goes. That's not the worst position to be in when you've lost week 1. I like the fact that they've got the kind of depth that we can pull in 2 decent halves for a completely new combination in week 2. Don't like the idea that they felt like they had to, although obviously Johnson's injury was one that was out of their hands, but maybe they just listened to us talking about Cody Nikorima and last time being a bit too inconsistent. I don't know. But we spoke a bit about that depth idea then as well, and also have done so on previous podcasts recently. And then I wrote a bit about it and writing about the Phoenix recently, having to overcome the fact that Alex Rufer is currently injured. And one of the things I was thinking about was like, I'd heard a snippet of it watching bits of, it was the Orlando Magic against the Brooklyn Nets. Kyrie Irving scored 60 points. Watched a bit of that, and they're talking about their rookie Franz Wagner, I think it is. Seems like an excellent player, like really, really talented dude. They were saying he's one of only like 6 or 7 players left in the NBA who has played every single game for their team this season. And I looked up what it was last year, and I think there were 11 players last year who played every single game for their team last season. And that was the lowest total since the league went to an 82-game season in the mid-60s. Like the fewest amount of players to have played every game in a season. And that was a 72-game season as well because of COVID. They started late, so they only played 72 instead of 82. Back to 82 this time around, and there's not even going to be 10. Like we're at 6 or 7, probably only going to be about 5 guys who play every single game by the end of the NBA season. Another month to go of the regulars. So I think that stacks up. It seems to be an idea that's like extremely prevalent in all sports right now. And yeah, an NRL season starting right about now, if you don't have depth to carry you through unavailabilities for whatever reason, for injuries, concussion is another factor of injury, but it's still, another one to watch out for. COVID-y stuff, obviously. Like, if you don't have that depth, you're not going very far. Little bit of a worry that the Warriors had to dip into it after 1 week. But I don't think it's necessarily just like panic stations. We lost a game. We need to change a bunch of things. I think they're like, obviously, Johnson being injured is the obvious one, but it's not quite that kind of let's shuffle up the team. But yeah, we'll see how they go against the Titans. You might want to add something onto that. Otherwise, I'd kind of curious to ask you what that Titans team is looking like from a Kiwi-NRL perspective.
The depth thing, though, is like a combination because players return. So like you can't select the same team if players that should be in the team are returning. So that's a factor. Matt Lodge and Reece Walsh return. Watene Zalesniak also injured. So there's like, whether it's just injury or suspension, it's those players being out and then the players coming back in. Because Cody Nikorima might be in the halves if Reece Walsh wasn't returning. So it's like that is also a factor. As well as when you got depth, you got competition for places. So then it becomes, well, who is commanding that selection more? And if people like, yes, Cody Nikorima is not injured, but who was more vibrant? who was more energetic, who was into the game more, him or Chanel Harris-Tavita? I believe Harris-Tavita was. And that and like other factors, like we talked about Sean Johnson, Nikorima, Kiwis halves combination, their styles seem to suit each other. Johnson, the organizing half, Nikorima can then, razzle dazzle, run the footy, be exciting, be attacking because Sean Johnson's there. Well, if you're not doing that, like you're not making a compelling case to then select you. And I don't know, there's not many blokes in this Warriors team who have the luxury of, I'll be selected most weeks. Like when you have depth, there is also a greater vibe of who actually wants to command game time. And you're not going to figure that out round one. You're not going to figure that out round two. So I'd rather have all these changes and ins and outs now, because then you're actually kind of weeding out the dudes who are inconsistent. You are saying like, we want to reward the dudes who are showing up with the right energy levels for training, for recovery, for game time performances. And I think for a lot of teams in the NRL, yes, there is generally, as you said, like there are less players in the NBA playing every single game. I'd say that applies to the NRL as well, unless you're like James Fisher-Harris. So yes, throughout the season, you're going to have a lot of ins and outs, but from who are the better players, I think you want to roll through combinations in the opening weeks of the season, because I mean, you would have seen it in your own perusal of NRL coverage. Everyone's got their knickers in a twist over round one, as per usual. For the Titans, I've talked about the Titans before as a interesting Kiwi-NRL club with a lot of their junior stuff. A lot of their junior stuff isn't quite firing at the moment because there is no Queensland under-21s yet. One player in their junior system to keep an eye on is Keanu Kinney. He is the fullback of the Tweed Seagulls. I think he's a Northcote junior as well as a Marist Saints. I think he did, and like referring a lot to basketball, but like basketball, like dudes will go to like high school and then they'll go to a little finishing school, a little prep program.
Yeah.
There's some clubs I think there's some clubs in Auckland that are some of those finishing school prep programs, because a lot of dudes will have their own, like their junior club, and then they'll go to a club like Marist, or they'll go to a club like Mount Albert, and then they'll go to Australia. And that's what Keanu Kinney did. I think he came up with Northcote, then he went to Marist for a few years. Now he's with Tweed in the Gold Coast Titans system. So he is starting fullback for the Tweed under-18s. And he was part of the championship team from last year, which had Dean Mariner starting at centre. So he's obviously good enough to earn selection in under-18s at a younger age. Now he is starting fullback. Reserve grade, Tweed also have Paul Turner starting at fullback in Queensland Cup. His brother, Lee Turner, is starting at centre. And that's why Paul Turner went to the Titans. Like they have Ezra Howe, Junior Kiwis coach, NZRL coach, who is one of the heads of recruitment at the Titans. That's a factor. Also, if your brother is playing for the reserve grade team, that's a factor. So shout out Paul Turner, and shout out to Kiwi-NRL, because we got Keanu Kinney starting at fullback in under-18s, Paul Turner starting at fullback in reserve grade, both hearty Aotearoa troopers. As far as NRL goes, still a fun team. Patrick Herbert starting centre, Greg Mazu, typically powerful on the wing, really robust, and the Warriors will have to do a job on him, because especially if he's getting in around loose ruck marking, very powerful, similar to Brian To'o. Shout out Gisborne's Moeaki Fotuaika, plays for Queensland and will represent Tonga at the end of the year in the World Cup. The Kiwis need a hooker, and they need hooking depth. So Brandon Smith is going to be like starting Kiwis hooker, I believe. And below that, it gets a bit sketchy. Maybe Jeremy Marshall-King. Maybe we check in with Aaron Clark at the Gold Coast Titans. He is a player, like he is a capable backup hooker for the Kiwis. I'll say that. Also has already played for Samoa. Isaac Liu, very good signing for the Titans. Didn't do much against the Eels, but that's kind of him. He plays his role in a very good Roosters team. He's not going to be a standout at the Titans, but hopefully he'll drive some of the culture. And then you've got Sam Lasoni coming off the bench, another one of these players to really flourish in Australian systems. So that's their top team. Herman Esse, named on the extended bench, as well as Esan Masters and Paul Turner. So Titans are a very good Kiwi-NRL club. And I'm curious how their vibe that we discussed against the Warriors, shootout vibe, good attacking team, not so good defensively, love to play footy. I'm curious how that shifts as a lot of these Kiwi-NRL juniors filter through to their top tier. Because all their Kiwi-NRL depth is kind of at the under 21, under 18 level. And I'm curious how that looks moving into the NRL program. And my forecasting prediction is that it will take the Gold Coast Titans from a plucky shootout team, might make the top 8. If you put really good Kiwi-NRL juniors, which a lot of the Titans juniors are, like they are high pedigree Kiwi-NRL juniors, if you put those dudes in around some of the top tier talent in the Titans NRL group, I reckon that's a good recipe. But that takes time. Also, shout out to Burleigh Bears, who are the other Titans feeder club. They've got the Lotaki brothers, Taniela and Dorian, who are both from Wesley College, I'd say. I think they are Manuel Marlins juniors as well, and they are definitely from Wesley College before moving to the Gold Coast, as well as Casey Newton-Fade is starting on the wing for the Burleigh Bears, and he is from Christchurch. So that's the extent to my Gold Coast Titans Kiwi-NRL knowledge off the top of the dome for your kasha. Any final rugby league thoughts there for you, Walker?
Well, it does just to add a little bit of spice to the contest. It's Ash Taylor against his old team, and it seems like there's quite a few players that have actually gone, probably for some of the reasons you're talking about. Heavy Kiwi-NRL sort of involvement in the recruitment type thing. Seems like there's quite a few players who have gone between these two clubs in recent years, isn't there? I don't know if there's more than what is normal between other clubs, but it just seems like there's a few.
Well, even more when you consider Georgia Hale.
Yeah,
was
right.
part of the Warriors women's team, as well as Crystal Tamarua. Both of them are now with the Gold Coast Titans. Georgia Hale's partners with Sam Lasoni, so that's a easy connection. But they both left because obviously NRL women's is all in Australia right now, so they took up those opportunities. Then you got Patrick Herbert, Aaron Clark was with the Warriors, Sam Lasoni was with the Warriors, Paul Turner was with the Warriors, so it's a decent 4 out of 24 players from the Warriors. As Aotearoa juniors, not Aussies. So yeah, decent. Spicy.
A spicy shootout is what we got on the cards. It's always that's a good recipe for a 5 p.m. Saturday evening. That's when you want your spicy Saturday dinner. So there you go.
Let's get into the football corner here, Wildcard. So you wrote about Alex Rufer, and just to quickly do a bit on the Phoenix. Why did you specifically, because I do like Kiwi-NRL spotlights. That's how I want to attack my rugby league writing this year. So just put the spotlight on one player, one thing, and just do little quick yarns about it. You chose to do a Phoenix thing zoning in on Alex Rufer, as opposed to like anything else. Like you've done Gail Sandoval was pretty good as well. Now you're doing Alex Rufer and his injury, his absence. Why was that the case?
Well, the kernel for that was, and thinking about the depth ideas that we've just talking about before, because Alex Rufer was 35 minutes or so into their last game, goes down, clutching his knee, can't really extend it properly, gets subbed off. A couple of days later, scans come back, busted ACL, out for at least the rest of the season, probably a chunk of next season as well. The captain, season-ending injury. It just that alone is, going to be a blow to any team. He'd been in really good form recently as well. He'd been playing some of his best footy, which is actually something that Ufuk echoed in the sort of like press announcement about that. The pull quote that was used from him. Started off by saying exactly that. He's been playing some of his best football recently, and it's a big shame. I thought it was interesting for a couple of there's the fact that he broke his leg when he was about 19 or 20 or something, and spent about probably close to a year recovering from that. So it's like his second long-term injury through his career. He's only about 25, but also just because it felt to me like, so the Phoenix were struggling earlier on in the season, right? We know this is how they do it every year. They start very slow, drop a lot of points, then they have a good unbeaten streak. The unbeaten streak started this time around with the introduction first of Giles Sandoval and then a couple games later of Scott Wooden. So you get two top quality imports into the team. Suddenly they go from being a team that's struggling, looking frustrating, like losing at multiple games 4-0, I think, to a team that has, I think, 2-3 game win streaks and I think a 7-game or something like that, a 7-game unbeaten streak, whatever it got up to. It might have been 8. Can't remember exactly. Like, they shoot themselves from last on the table all the way up to I think top half, and within range of going even higher if they can continue this run of form throughout the rest. They lost their first game in that for a while in that Brisbane game that Rufer got injured in. But the idea that a couple of players made such a difference and took this team to another level, to where they go from being like not nowhere near competitive enough to being competitive with anybody. 2 players did that. Like, obviously everyone else is playing better around them and whatever, but the introduction of 2 guys is what kind of triggered that. And now you've got one of their key players out for the rest of the season. So the flip side of that is, well, how many players can they afford to lose before we have the inverse thing and they stop being this competitive? And it doesn't help that, and this is the other reason why I thought it was worth writing about, to think about like who steps up. The obvious answer is Nick Pennington, because he's been sitting on the bench waiting for an opportunity. But can Nick Pennington do what Alex Rufer did? I don't know, like, benefit of the doubt, but he does seem to be, to me, a little bit more like Clayton Lewis than like Rufer. And then you've got 2 Lewises, and it comes back to like this idea of what we talked about on that Patreon podcast at the start, which was clips. Some of that about like, no, it was in the variety show, wasn't it? About like, you sort of want halves that in an NRL game that complement each other. And the Phoenix had that in their midfield, like 2 guys who they had a lot of like similar, like Rufer and Lewis have a lot of similar things about them, hard workers and good passers and whatever, but they also have like the things you could say are a weakness in Rufer's game, Lewis covers, and vice versa. So like there's a few things where they bring out the best in each other in terms of like the things they share, but then also their weaknesses and strengths align nicely to cover for each other. So that combination changing is a worry for me. The fact that there's really no one else in the squad who can play midfield at an expected elite level. You don't know, like someone could step up and just be amazing, but there's no one else who's really got that experience yet. Which means, like, sure, Pennington comes in for Rufer. There's a debate about how that works. Like, how does changing that balance in the midfield, does that make them better? Does that make them worse? How does it go? But then also, what happens if one of them gets injured next? Then what happens? Who steps up then? And that's because you'd probably be going someone like Josh Laws, I think would be the best bet. But Josh Laws has been started every single game at centre back. So in order to put him in the midfield, you've got to change your centre back combination as well as your midfield combination. So there's like a domino roll-on effect going on there. So all of that is why I thought it was an interesting little scenario, and potentially a little bit of a a little bit of a tipping point in their season in terms of like how they solve this problem could have a lot to do with how they roll further on. And it's just the case with any sports team season as well, where like there's only so many injuries you can handle. Like the Golden State Warriors NBA dynasty kind of, maybe it's back now, who knows, but that run that they had came to an end just because everyone got injured at once. The Phoenix can probably cope with Alex Rufer being out for the rest of the season. I imagine they've got enough like talent and depth around to be able to cope with that fine. The question is, this brings them one thing closer to what I said before about like, well, how many injuries is too many injuries? So it shifts that little delicate balance there in the squad. So all of which is why I wrote about it, and there's plenty more words where that came from in the article itself.
Combat sports, city kickboxing, MMA, boxing, depth, good Aotearoa fighting, fucking scrapping, depth. Like the depth is there. New Zealand Warriors got some depth, and also NRL depth is really important in our current climate. Wellington Phoenix, depth explored right there. All Whites are playing footy here, Wildcard. I imagine depth is a factor in the All Whites footy that is coming up as well. Can you look at the All Whites through the depth lens? Because that's the theme of the podcast, and I think it's going to tell the story about where the All Whites are at right now, what to expect from their upcoming footy, and everything that intrigues you there.
Yeah, this All Whites tour is all about depth. Like it fits perfectly with this theme. To like just explain what's going on, like they've got the Oceania qualifiers, right? This is to see which team advances out of Oceania for the next phase of the World Cup qualifying, which will be an intercontinental playoff against a North and Central American team. So a better draw than they got last time, having to play against Peru from South America. So at the moment, that's probably going to be because Canada's already qualified. USA and Mexico look like they'll probably qualify. There's still a couple rounds to go in that. But probably Costa Rica, maybe like was it Honduras or El Salvador? I can't remember which one. It seemed like that. So, a team that's within reason of the All Whites being able to beat them. Like it's feasible that they could go through there and make another World Cup. Like that's possible. They could, but to do that, obviously they got to get through the Oceania stuff, which they should, but it's a matter of taking care of business. They're in Qatar. They got to play, I think Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and New Caledonia in the group stages. And there's a semi-final, then there's a final. So 5 games over the space of about like 2 weeks or something like that. It's a bit of a hefty schedule, but in order to fit that schedule in, Oceania have had to make the tournament. I say had to, but they shouldn't have had to. It's crazy to think that Danny Hayes been complaining about this from day one, and he's dead right too. Like it's absolutely stupid that this has happened, but the tournament overlaps with the international window. So the first game or two happen before the international window begins, which means that a lot of the All Whites' best players are not going to be available. Which means they've called up guys like Ben Wayne, Ben Old, Costa Barbarouses, I think, is over there at the moment. Like there's a few of these A-League guys, Clayton Lewis as well. Ollie Sale, is Dane Ingham, I think it's the 6 of them, and 1 or 2 others, like Dalton Wilkins as well, who are only going to be there for the first couple of games. And then as other players come in after they play their games this weekend and become available. So like, hopefully Chris Wood will be there by the second game because Newcastle play tomorrow, Friday morning. And then you'd imagine he flies over pretty soon after that game, next day or whatever. A few more examples like that. Like as these games get played, more guys from the actual team will arrive, and then the A-League, which doesn't break for the internationals, those guys will go back and play for their club teams. So it's just sort of like a lot of juggling, a lot of arranging with clubs about who can play when and how and who's going to be released in time. And could we maybe just have them for the first game or 2 and then we'll send them back to you and those kind of things. So lots of handshake deals, I would imagine, if Danny Hay doing a lot of like diplomacy and all that. But the overall theme of that, because I don't think it's in neutral territory against Oceanian nations like that. The All Whites have been playing a lot in Middle East countries recently anyway, so that's all fine. They're used to the conditions. They were supposed to host this tournament. It's been delayed like 2 or 3 times because of COVID. It was meant to happen like a year and a half ago. They would have hosted it if it had happened on time, but it didn't. So as it is, no home field advantage, but something close to it. It's a lot easier for a lot of the European-based players to travel to Qatar rather than traveling all the way to New Zealand as well. So I see no excuses in the squad shuffling and stuff. I see no reason why this should be a problem. There's about 10 or 11 players who are going to be there throughout in order to give like a consistent core of the team. Winston Reid is one of them, the most important one of them. I don't see any way in which this should change anything other than the All Whites being heavily favoured to advance from this tournament, which they should do if they perform anywhere near their abilities. However, it's a spotlight on their depth because they've had to pick like 30 odd players to be in this tournament, and there's one or two like Michael Boxall, Marco Rojas. They haven't really been able to get releases for them from their clubs for various reasons. So there's even guys who would normally be there that aren't. It's just as much as anything, keeping with the theme of this podcast, massive spotlight on the All Whites' current depth and just how good it is as well. Because I don't think that team that lines up for the first thing, even though it's basically going to be a B team with a couple of exceptions, I still think that's going to look like a pretty bloody strong team when they walk out there against Papua New Guinea at, I think it's 3 a.m. Saturday morning, something like that. Might be one for taping and watching the next day, but see how it goes.
Give us a couple of minutes on undercover low-key players that excite you.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find the squad list. I haven't got it in front of me, but I think Ollie Sail is going to be an interesting one because of the goalkeepers that have been picked. Stefan Marinovic is the only one that's actually been capped before. I think Matt Gould is there and Jamie Searle is there. Matt Gould plays lower tier English stuff. Jamie Searle plays under 23s for Swansea. Ollie Sail is probably going to start that first game, potentially the second game, depending on how soon Marinovic can get there. Great opportunity for him as someone who knocked Marinovic out of the starting gloves for the Phoenix. He's someone who's finally getting opportunities. Ben Waine is someone else who probably wouldn't necessarily make a first team squad ordinarily, but is going to be is probably going to get some minutes in this first game. I'm just trying to remember who's going to be available when and where, because the first one is the most interesting one because it is when you're going to get to see some of that depth. I think Andre de Jong's there already. He's a really interesting one because he hardly ever plays for Amazulu in South Africa. But then when he does play, he'll have like a month where he's playing every game and then he'll disappear for like 4 months. It's a weird one. I think he must, I'm assuming there must be injuries or suspensions or whatever every time he pops up. But I watch these highlights. I watch as much as I can of when he does play. And he's always involved in something good. Like he's always playing a part in a goal or something whenever he plays. So, and he looks fitter. He looks like sharper and more technical than I remember him being when he played for Eastern Suburbs. So I have no doubt that he's become a much better player playing in that South African environment. Like he played Champions League in South Africa last week. Jerry Brocky is the only other New Zealander who's ever played in that tournament in the African Champions League. So seeing him in I'm assuming he'll get a good opportunity in that first game if he's there. He's a guy I'm excited to see just because he doesn't get enough regular football, and this is an opportunity. And then there's nothing undercover about him, but I talked on the Variety Show about Winston Reid's little All Whites resurgence here, available for all these games, and just how he seems to have prioritized All Whites football in recent times. A little the Reid Renaissance, Red Sky Reid, I think you dubbed it last time. I want to see as much Winston Reid over this tournament as possible, and hopefully he stays fit through it all, and hopefully plays some excellent football and maybe even pops up with a goal or two. Who knows? He's only ever scored one goal for the All Whites. It was a rather famous one at the last World Cup. So as he tries to bookend his international career with a second World Cup towards the end, having played at a World Cup at the very beginning of his international career, that whole journey has me absolutely fascinated, and one more reason to get excited about this whole thing, I suppose.
I'm like chuckling in my head because this whole time I've had the Blackcaps on the hoist. Back end, good little segment about the Blackcaps, and I've just like made sure to introduce and reaffirm the idea of depth with a goal in mind, with an objective in mind. No goals, no objectives, just an awareness of where the podcast was going to end, right? So I like, now I'm just crammed with so many segues that like there is no segue. So it's going to be like depth to depth, but then you brought up the Winston Reid thing, and a far better segue that isn't a segue, but a far better connection was drawn, because Winston Reid, like, he's just chilling, right? Like, he doesn't have a professional football gig, right?
Yeah,
now.
No club,
no
unattached.
Club. So all he is doing is playing for Aotearoa, which is probably the best thing I've heard today. So shout out to Winston Reid. Well, you brought that up on the podcast before,
variety show, but yeah,
but it still applies. Definitely the best thing I've that's entered my taringa today. Shout out Winston Reid. But that's like, as a non-athlete, I view that as like a Shangri-La type of situation, a heaven situation, a divine football situation where you don't have any professional rigours. The challenge is to show up at an international caliber without those professional rigours, but you don't have the grind of professional football. And if you're someone like Winston Reid, full mana points, full mana juice, stepping up to international football for the All Whites isn't like a massive leap forward. Coming to the Blackcaps, and the reason the Blackcaps depth is on display here is because all these dudes are going to the IPL. Like, Kane Williamson and Trent Boult are the only dudes who are going to play over 7 games. So there's all these other IPL dudes who are unavailable for Aotearoa selection because they're going to the IPL where they might play 1 game. And I'll leave it up to you, because we don't really like discuss the IPL. I'll leave it up to you to find the players who are absent, and keeping an eye on the IPL over the last few years, I've come to realize that Trent Boult and Kane Williamson are the only dudes who hit the 10-game mark in an IPL season. So think about all the dudes who are unavailable for Aotearoa because of IPL commitments. They are dudes who might play 1 game. They might play 2 games. There are dudes like a Glenn Phillips or a Jimmy Neesham or a Tim Selby. Like, they might play 4 or 5 games. But the majority of these dudes are going to play less than 3 games. But they still get the benefit of a contract. They still get the benefit of training in that environment, being surrounded by a lot of the world's best players. Like, it's still a beneficial thing for them, which is why New Zealand cricket allows them to play in the IPL. But I'm thinking about like best case sporting scenarios. Winston Red Sky Reid, no professional commitments, gets to represent Aotearoa. Seems pretty cool. Going to the IPL, unlikely to play a game, get all the benefits of all the bells and whistles, the trimmings. That seems pretty cool as well. And I don't think it's as good as Winston Red Sky Reid. No professional football, international football only for the time being. I don't think it's quite that level, but I wouldn't mind being one of these Blackcaps dudes who just goes to the IPL as part of the squad and gets all the bells and whistles. That would be pretty fun.
Yes, this is worst places to be, I'd imagine. I thought when you said the Winston Reid, when you started like going on to a segue with Winston Reid, I thought it was going to be Reid and Taylor, which is sort of what that's how I framed the thing on the variety show, was about like Twilight Taylor versus Redux Reid. I don't know, Red Sky Reid, Renaissance Reid. I started off trying to think about a Winston one at first, couldn't think of anything, and now I realized just using Reid is everything. There's a million different taglines I could give that one, but some similar areas there as well. But just many segues. I didn't realize there were 12. Red Sky Reader's first 1A with all of the rest of
Yeah,
them.
but then you've used your imagination for these other terms.
I was just running off the top. The tap was turned. You know, I didn't turn it off. It was the water was running. I didn't realize there's 12 guys in the IPL. And to think that like maybe 10 of them are probably only going to get to play a handful of games is a good for lifestyle. Not as good for cricket when it's costing you black cap stuff, but it's not like they're missing test matches. I suppose it's a scheduled Netherlands tour at 2023 ODIs, I think it is, and a good opportunity to look at some of that depth as well. So it's not too bad. The focus is going to be on Ross Taylor regardless, so as it is, I guess.
Well,
I didn't know this Michael Rippon got added to the Netherlands team as well, along with Logan Van Beek was already there. So lots of Kiwi sport in depth.
Max O'Dowd as well. Max O'Dowd
right.
Plays. I think he might have played the odd game for Auckland. Maybe he's definitely played Auckland A games as late and recently as this summer. I think he played for the Netherlands last year and then returned for the summer, and he was playing cricket in Auckland. So like all the media stuff around that Dutch squad was about this dude Fred Klaassen, who I couldn't find much about, but they were like, oh, the Netherlands team are going to be playing New Zealand with these Kiwi players, and it's like Logan Van Beek and Fred Klaassen. I'm like, well, you're just like, first of all, I've never, shout out to Fred Klaassen, shout out to any of his whānau who are here in Aotearoa. Personally, I couldn't find any information about you, but I also do know that there's a dude, Max Dowd, who kind of lives in Aotearoa, plays cricket in Aotearoa, and consistently represents the Netherlands, which seems right up level with the Logan Van Beek, who you highlighted his great-grandfather, in a recent email, Sammy Gullion.
Gwilyn, I think. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. Gwilyn. It was an unreal story.
If you're a half Pakeha, half Palangi Kiwi, and you've got West Indian ancestry, that is fucking cool. That is.
And you play for the Netherlands.
Oh, that's up there with Winston Reid playing international football only. So shout out to them. Shout out to Michael Rippon. There was a bit of noise about Michael Rippon being called into wider Blackcaps training at one point as well, which, not to throw you under the bus, but I do think you were talking up a wee bit, if memory serves me correctly. But now he's playing for the Dutch. So I'd imagine
that path might have closed.
Michael Rippon is already in New Zealand, so it's an easy, like if the Dutch needed a player, or they were kind of working on him, I think, behind the scenes maybe. And Otago aren't too good in the Plunket Shield, so there's no reason for Otago to be like, nah, fuck Netherlands, we don't want Michael Rippon to play for you. We want him to play Plunket Shield, which would be kind of shit anyway. But if Otago aren't winning Plunket Shield games, and Anaru Kitchen, I think, is already retired, of course, Michael Rippon's going to be allowed to play for the Netherlands. Shout out to Latutu Taylor as well. His last ODI thing. To me, it's like, okay, that's cool, but Twilight Taylor's far bigger than an ODI series against Netherlands, and we have already had the magical moment. Like, this will be a celebration of Latutu Taylor. It'll be a bit of a roadshow around Aotearoa. It'll be his last games for Aotearoa, but between him motherfucking taking a wicket with his final act of Test cricket, and then possibly the Twilight Taylor period of we might get county cricket, we might get more domestic cricket. Like, the least interesting thing is him in this ODI squad for me personally, not his importance or not what he wants to do, but my intrigue, this Netherlands series is below him taking a Test wicket and Twilight Taylor beyond the Blackcaps. But that is ignoring wildcard, the biggest thing about this Blackcaps squad, these Blackcaps squad, and that is depth. A few weeks ago, I brought up the pool of players, right? Like Colin de Grandhomme, he jumped back in the pool, and he is the king of the pool right now. Like, if he still had his mullet haircut, his mullet would be flowing as he did laps. Like, he's not wearing a fucking swim cap. He is letting his mullet flow, and he is beating dudes in a freestyle race despite the aerodynamic difficulties of a mullet. Aqua dynamic, maybe, because it's not air, it's water. But Blackcaps depth has been a huge factor in our podcast, in our content. Now, I think we have a beautiful scenario where the depth is Dane Cleaver and Michael Bracewell, both of whom have been on the domestic landscape. I just want to make sure these debut dates are correct. Let me pull this up. Michael Bracewell, first class debut 2011. Dane Cleaver, first class debut 2011. So the Blackcaps depth is players around the age of 30 who know themselves, who have grown into themselves as blokes, who know their cricket game inside out. Michael Bracewell may have already been a fantastic leader throughout his career. Right now, I have him as the best leader of men in Aotearoa cricket. Cameron Fletcher got called up for the Test squad. Now Dane Cleaver gets called up for the ODI squad, for the T20 squad. This is the most poignant moment of Aotearoa Blackcaps depth, because these two dudes are very good cricketers. Michael Bracewell is a fantastic cricketer. Dane Cleaver scores runs in every single format, and I'm not someone who has sat there watching tape of Tom Blundell, Tim Seifert, Cameron Fletcher, and Dane Cleaver keeping wicket. I haven't broken down from a wicketkeeper perspective who is the best wicketkeeper. I don't think Dane Cleaver is much worse than Tom Blundell. I don't think Dane Cleaver is much worse than Cameron Fletcher. I'd suggest they're all probably fairly similar in their pure wicket-keeping ability. And this is like poignant, pivotal, celebration. These are words that come to mind when thinking about this specific pocket of Blackcaps depth, because these aren't young players. And what we know about the Blackcaps is their success stems from these type of selections, these type of players who know themselves, who are mature, know their role, know how they fit into a squad, know their strengths and weaknesses. Younger blokes are trying to figure that out on the move. Now the Blackcaps depth is really good cricketers, like high pedigree cricketers. Dane Cleaver, I think he's an under-19 rep, Kane Williamson's cousin. Fucking smells like pedigree to me. Michael Bracewell, from the illustrious Bracewell cricketing whānau, also an under-19 rep. Absolutely freak of a cricketer. Like, these are high pedigree cricketers. These aren't like straight up like Brent Arnell. These aren't Peter Ingrams. These are dudes who are like among the best cricketers in Aotearoa. They just haven't been on that Blackcaps pedestal yet. And to me, it's just a celebration of the depth that we have been pondering for a long time. Wildcard.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the squads. There's a lot of crossover between the T20. I think there's only one T20 and then the three ODIs. A couple like the ins and outs between them, but like I'm imagining Dane Cleaver's. In fact, I think they said something about this in the press release. Like the difference between Cleaver and Fletcher in this scenario is that Cleaver can open the batting and does so regularly for CD. So that's probably the one thing that splits them, because as has been the case for quite a while, there's not a lot of difference between these keepers. And you just highlighted like their ability with the gloves. It's the same with their ability with the bat, like there's is it probably those top three, would you say, right now? Obviously BJ Watling has stepped off the thing. You might even, I don't know, because the three being Blundell, Fletcher, and Cleaver. I don't know if there's someone else that would be on, probably not in that category. You do have the part timers, obviously, like Conway, and Latham's probably better than a part timer. He's the first choice ODI keeper at this point, has been for a couple of years, but that's sort of like you only pick one wicketkeeper in the game, right? Tim Seifert, of course. I forgot about Tim Seifert, who's at the IPL. Yeah.
Tim Seifert is there and he's in the IPL. I wouldn't necessarily say he's better than Dane Cleaver. I wouldn't say he's better than Cameron Fletcher with bat or the wicket-keeping gloves. And that's an interesting point because out of sight, out of mind. Seifert's not going to play more than 2 games in the IPL, for sure. But he's in the IPL. And now we're going to have, like Cameron Fletcher was called up to the test squad. Now it's Dane Cleaver getting the opportunity in the limited over squads where previously Seifert got those opportunities. But off the top of my head, domestic cricket, like Seifert's averaging less than 20 in the Plunket Shield. And we have often discussed his lack of runs in the Super Smash, in the Ford Trophy. Like he has not had a dominant summer by any stretch of the imagination. And it's convenient that he's now in the IPL and opportunities are going elsewhere, because then a tough decision would have to be made if Seifert was available. And now you're choosing between Cleaver, Seifert, and Fletcher, as opposed to just Cleaver and Fletcher. And if you're making that Cleaver-Fletcher decision, yeah, you can say like, oh, it's because top order bat. You can come up with any reason. Like an equally fine reason is that Fletcher got called up to the test squad. Now it's Dane Cleaver's turn, like that is the celebration of depth that we have.
And as we know, the Blackcaps are fairly loyal to guys who have been called up to their squad. Like it's very hard to get to that point. Once you get to that point, they tend to stick with you and give you a bit of a chance. I mean, there's some guys in the, like Scott Kugelines and there's is he in both squads? He's in the 2020 squad, not the ODI squad. Like I think Blair Tickner is in both. Like guys who have played a few games and maybe you're on the front. Tickner's been bowling quite well recently, I think, for CD, hasn't he? So he's maybe earned his way back in there, like sort of dipped and come back up. So Kugeline's probably a little bit lucky to be there, but I mean, that's what happens when you have a bunch of guys unavailable. They like Will Young's a good example, in and around the squad for ages, waiting for a chance and then like working his way in there and like nailing it on. There's who's the other Matt Henry is another example in there as someone who like has been in a lot of squads, doesn't always like just had a fantastic series against South Africa in the test stuff. He's already has been for several years first choice ODI bowler. Once you get into that club, you're gonna get some opportunities at some point. You might have to be patient, you might have to wait your time, but like they've picked you for a reason and you're gonna at some point get to show what you can do. And Cam Fletcher has been called up very recently for the test squad, and Dane Cleaver has been called up for this, I think for this 2020. I don't think he's in the other group, is he? No. But for this 2020. That's, if I was Tim Seifert, I'd be a little bit concerned by that, to be honest, of exactly what you just said, like the out of sight, out of mind factor. 2 more wicketkeepers have been added to the pool of Blackcaps candidates. And he hasn't necessarily nailed on his spot himself in terms of like, he's had some very good Blackcaps performances. He's had some less than good ones. Yeah, it's, I think that's a little bit of a pivotal time for him. And as much as the lifestyle thing of going to the IPL and hanging around and not having to play too many grueling games might be lovely to experience, might not be the best time in his career for that, just for him personally.
I feel like we've worked through various levels of depth to get through the podcast. And this, to me, sums up what we're dealing with the Blackcaps and their depth. It's a quote from Gary Stead, but it's via Cricinfo, and it's about Kane Williamson fucking whatever he's doing. I don't know. Gary Stead says, we try and show loyalty to those that have been in our squad. And I think that's been part of the reason we've had some success. We don't make it easy to get into the teams. But Michael Bracewell has been knocking on the door for a while. He's a true rounder, blah, blah, blah. It's not easy to get into this Black Caps team. They show loyalty to the dudes that have been in the squads and the teams and have had to wait for their opportunity, like Blundell, like Young, like Matt Henry. So that is in this podcast, that is our peak level of depth, where you're showing loyalty to the dudes that have done it before, and you're making it harder for the other dudes to get into the squad. Thus, you're raising the entry point into the squad. Whereas we know previous Black Caps teams, the entry point to being a Black Cap was not very high. Now, you need to be commanding selection, and you need to display patience, and you need to be at the best of your ability as a man, as a cricketer, to enter the Black Caps. And I think that's a really good reflection of the depth. No loyalty shown to Rachin Ravindra wildcard.
No, has he? He has played 2020s, hasn't he? Because he was in the Bangladesh tour, which was a B team.
This is in New Zealand, so Ish Sodhi, great opportunity for him as the lead spinner in both in the ODIs and the T20s. Mark Chapman's the only other one with some spin skills there, wildcard. And what do we know about Mark Chapman?
He doesn't bowl very much, but Michael Bracewell does, to be fair. You did just have that quote from Steady talking about him as an all-rounder. So.
Easy on. So what do we know about Mark Chapman's bowling?
Glenn Phillips out-bowls him at every opportunity for Auckland.
So there's going to be a situation where Mark Chapman might not be much of a spinner for Auckland, but he might be a spinner for Aotearoa in the series. Now we think about Michael Bracewell. What does Michael Bracewell do as a cricketer? Left-hand bat, good fielder, good off-spinner. What does Rachin Ravindra do? Left-hand bat, good fielder, left-arm spin. In very simple terms, they play a similar role. And they're both from Wellington, so they love each other. There's no niggle, it's happy days. But in the Black Caps realm, now Michael Bracewell has been selected ahead of Rachin Ravindra. And if you're thinking about Rachin Ravindra in the test team, straight pure talent ready for test cricket, Michael Bracewell might be the better option if you're looking for that role. Personally, I think they're both behind Mitchell Santner, but I'm seduced by Mitchell Santner. But it's a very interesting dynamic there with the spin situation. First and foremost, Ish Sodhi is playing as the frontline spinner. And I think a lot of people are going to overlook that. I think that's really interesting in the white ball stuff is Ish Sodhi usually is bowling with Mitchell Santner in the white ball cricket. So usually he's got someone else to tie up an end and play as a wicket-taking person, which limits his role. So maybe with a greater role, we might see different things from Ish Sodhi, but it's just to say that there is intrigue there. Then you've got Mark Chapman. Glenn Phillips is straight up a better spinner for Auckland than Mark Chapman. But we know the Black Caps love a bit of Mark Chapman spin bowling. Intrigue there. Then you get into the Bracewell-Ravindra connection and tension maybe. Not tension from personal standpoint, but the tension between their skill sets in relation to the Black Caps. I think to hype up some funk, to hype up some intrigue here, I think that spin department and the absence of Rachin Ravindra could be quite interesting. What are your thoughts there?
Agree entirely, because it does really seem like Bracewell's selection is in the exact spot, the exact role that Ravindra would have been there for. Because I don't think Ravindra would have been opening the batting and maybe ODIs, but probably not, because Guptill and Nichols are both there and they've been an established partnership there. So if you're batting outside the top two, well, Bracewell can do that. He can bat anywhere from like 3 to 6, and if you can bat 3, you can bat 11, or you can bat anywhere in the lineup. But obviously, he's overqualified to be batting anywhere below those sort of like 4 spots. That's exactly what Ravindra might otherwise have been asked to do had he been picked. So yeah, he's probably been picked directly above him. I will mention there is one other spinner in the ODI team, of course, not in the T20 team, but a fella who took a wicket with his most recent ball in Test cricket. He might get a bowl in the ODIs as well. Imagine if he finished his ODI career with a wicket, same as he did with the Test stuff. Like if you got them 9 down in the second innings of the third game, which I think is in Hamilton, so his home ground. I think so. One of them's in Hamilton. I think it's the third one. It'd be a brave man in Tom Latham's shoes who doesn't throw the ball to Ross Taylor again and say, like, let's see it once more. Let's make it happen. Make the miracle repeat itself. It would be a brave man not to do that. I mean, he resisted it a little bit in that Test match, and then sort of eventually got to the point where he knew it was like, I got to do it. The crowd's begging for it. I got to do it. And then he took the catch himself as well for that moment. So Tom Latham captaining both these teams. I'm just throwing that one out into the universe, and we'll see what comes back.
Tom Latham, skipper of the magical moment.
Exactly.
One last thought here to wrap up the podcast, Wildcat. This isn't anything about Tim Seifert, but if you like put yourself in Tim Seifert's boots, or someone in the same situation as Tim Seifert, would you rather be in the IPL and all the good and bad there, or would you rather be, I'm going to refrain from using descriptive terms that could have a negative or positive twinge, or would you rather be playing for the Blackcaps in this ODI squad as part of the Laturu Taylor celebration? That is something I have to that is a premise I have to include.
I mean, I think the decision there is one that he can't really predict ahead of time, is because we know he probably won't play a lot in the IPL. He didn't play a lot in the IPL last year.
No, it's not about him. It's about you. What do you want to do? Would you rather be in the IPL, or would you rather be playing some ODI cricket with Laturu Taylor and the joys of Aotearoa, you know?
Well, me personally, then I don't have to say that maybe Tim Seifert wouldn't have actually made the ODI team. Tom Latham is the keeper anyway. So, but me personally, I'd rather be playing for the Blackcaps. And part of the Twilight Taylor. I was going to say roadshow. I don't know. That's just much more intriguing to me. If I was in that situation, I would still want to at some point be part of an IPL thing, though. That would be fun. Tim Seifert was there last year, though, so he's got that experience under the belt. I don't know. But me personally, I'd rather be at Seddon Park for that last ODI.
But international travel niggle, probably won't play much in the IPL, but you'll get good money, you'll get good learning opportunities in Aotearoa, late summer vibes, like Laturu Taylor, bit of cricket buzz with the Women's World Cup happening as well. It'll be a tough one.
Positive and negatives both ways. You know, you can make a case either way. You can get the whiteboard out and start listing the pluses and minuses. You'd have a long list on either side, but that third ODI though is going to be something. Especially if he gets the ball late on, especially if the Blackcaps bat first and try to bowl Netherlands out.
For some reason, despite what I've witnessed with my own eyes, it feels super unrealistic that the Laturu Taylor will bowl.
I mean, it's series. Not happening outside the last couple partnerships of the last game, but if they happen to like finagle their way into that scenario, by the grace of God, you know, who knows?
What I'd prefer is if he bowled leg spin.
Well, I just wrote that Shane Warne piece, greatest leg spinner of all time, about his efforts against New Zealand in various formats. And I ended it by talking about the time that he came and played here for the World 11 against the Blackcaps when the Sri Lankan, there's the Boxing Day tsunamis, and they were touring here at the time and they went back. Although some of them stayed behind, like Murali and Sangakkara and Chaminda Vas and Jayasuriya, I think all played as part of that World 11, which raised like $1 million for the relief fund. They did a great effort with it. And Shane Warne captained that team. And in the last game was in Hamilton, and the pitch was an absolute minefield, and the World 11 got bowled out for like 80. And then the Blackcaps chased it with only about 4 wickets to spare. It was just a terrible game. So they figured it was bad enough that they're like, well, people have paid to be here. It's for charity. So let's just play a 10-over knockaround game. I'm sure you remember this. And they did play a little 10-over knockaround game. And at one point, Shane Warne bowled, I think it was the last over of that innings. He came on and bowled pace, pretending to be Merv Hughes. Like he did the Merv Hughes like sideways run up in the action and everything. And then he bowled some Greg Matthews off spin. So there's I don't know if that's probably before Ross Taylor's time. I don't think he would have been in the team at that point. Craig McMillan was actually batting against him. Craig McMillan dismissed more times by Shane Warne than any other Blackcaps batter, both in test matches and in ODIs. He had a great relationship with him. He also smacked him for many a massive six, so it was not completely one-sided. But Craig McMillan, actually, I noticed, because the video was all about Shane Warne, but I noticed Craig McMillan at one point, not realizing that Warne was going to bowl off spins instead of leggies, tried to bring back the sideways batting stance. He set up like that, and the commentators never mentioned it. Like, they just focused on Shane Warne bowling funny, missing the point that McMillan was trying to join in on the party as well. Sad stink there, because that sideways batting thing was brilliant and hilarious from a guy who went on to be the Blackcaps' batting coach. But Warney did that once upon a time, mixed up his bowling action. I don't see why Ross Taylor shouldn't have a leggy in the bank somewhere, or maybe he'll bowl off the long run up himself and be like, this is my Shane Bond impersonation.
That is the Niche Cast, coming in off the long run up for another beautiful podcast. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Church.